Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 47th episode of the ABT Time podcast. And today, in this episode, we're actually going to be handing it over to our good buddy, Park Howell, who has put together for his podcast, The Business of Story, for his 400th episode. He did a special synthesis of kind of everything that everybody's talked about on the ABT in his probably 5, 6, 7 years he's been doing. God, 7 years, I bet he's been doing that podcast. I've been a guest on it, I think 5 or 6 times, and it's a great synthesis of where the ABT is in the business world, but it also circles around to the science world by the end of it. Before we get started, a couple little updates on where we are in ABT land. The course is booming. We are booked all the way into June now with the course. And let's see, at the moment, we have got rounds 32 and 33 going. 32 is with the U.S. Forest Service. I am teaching that one. And round 33, for the first time ever, is being taught by Mr. Matt David, the author of the Matt template. And that is with Counterpart International, a nonprofit that works globally, which is amazing. So tremendous seeing Matt taking over the reins. He also had a rather amazing experience last month. The World Bank folks brought him to Thailand for a week to work with at a conference they had there with about 120 of their people. And Matt, can you tell us maybe the top 3 most memorable elements of that whole experience of going there to Bangkok?
Sure, Randy. Well, top most memorable would have to be the actual presentation itself, the 2-hour lecture that I gave. That was incredible. It's been so long because of the pandemic and because of all our Zoom classes that I actually have been able to do an in-person lecture, that being able to just feel the energy in the room was just phenomenal. And they were so receptive too. I forgot what it was like. Actually, I'm not even sure if I've ever experienced this, but to see someone get so excited about a slide that they stand up to make sure they get a good shot with their phone. Wow. That's
I forgot that even happens.
Yeah, that's a thing that happens. I remember this now. Right. Number 2 was right after the lecture, when it was obvious that it resonated with people, because they would come up and ask some of the brightest, smartest questions. They saw how this kind of fit in with what they were already doing. They just wanted some fine tuning details so they could start going and using it themselves. That was amazing.
What countries were they from mostly?
Oh, it was all across East Asia and South Asia, just a smorgasbord of countries. You name it, they were there. So yeah, it was, and it was one of those things that it resonated regardless of where they were from. Number 3 was the boat ride.
Wait. What was number 2?
Oh, no, number 2 was right after the lecture, everyone coming up and talking.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Number three was we had this crazy party boat ride going up and down the river, right by the hotel. And it's this huge, almost yacht thing with a dance floor on the ceiling and a buffet and buffet seating. And there's dancers wearing masks being followed around with musicians that will come up and dance right behind you. And it's what is going on? And they're oh, the dancers, Matt, that's just Thailand. You just got to expect that kind of thing in Thailand. It's okay.
Were you doing drugs for that?
No, I was not.
Okay.
I was not. It was so funny. The World Bank crew, they really wanted to get down in their way. So they had there was a live singer and live music there, but they completely confiscated the musician. They took over with a YouTube playlist of Indian music. So it was all this Bollywood music up on the dance floor. It was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And I think the runner-up would be the airline food. Amazing. It was fantastic. It was this Korean airline and some of the best Korean barbecue I've ever had. So there you go.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
I did that trip to Nepal in September, and it was the same thing. They had a big party and dance and got hours and hours of dance on the last night there at the resort that we were at. That is hilarious. The World Bank people know how to enjoy themselves.
Oh yeah, they do.
Yeah, that's great. Okie dokie. Well, let's see. Just a couple other little teasers of things that we're up to. In the works are 2 new versions of the Narrative Gym book. So we last fall came out with the 5th version, the Narrative Gym for science graduate students and postdocs, which is doing great. People are using in courses. And now there's 2 more that are in the works. I'm not even going to tell you the content of those, but the next few weeks we'll be starting to lay the foundation for those. So we'll end up with at least 7 books in this series of the Narrative Gym, which is great. And it really kind of conveys the message of how multidisciplinary the ABT is. And the third, or the last little topic to mention before we jump into Park's presentation, is ChatGPT, which is everywhere now. And I gave a talk a month ago to the folks at Pfizer that we've been working with. They have this monthly event called their Worldwide Medical Grand Round Seminar. And I gave it. And in there, I had one slide about ChatGPT, which back then, the beginning of February, it was just, people were just starting to talk a lot about it. And what I said was that think of ChatGPT as being like a really super duper fancy race car, which is great and it's impressive and zips all over the place. But the steering wheel is still narrative, which is what ABT is. And if you don't have a steering wheel, the car is just not making sense. I mean, it's amazing to watch as it goes zooming by, but it's not adding up anything. Somebody's got to be driving it. That's what narrative is about. Narrative is leadership. You need to have narrative intuition so that you know how to drive these things properly. And if you do, ChatGPT is going to prove to be this really powerful resource, like unbelievably powerful. It is so fast. And I think it's going to be a pathway to especially focus on this key element of the formula we've said from the beginning with what we do with our training, which is 3 things. S plus I equals R, simplicity plus, S plus R equals I, simplicity plus repetition equals intuition. And it's that R factor, the repetition. This is what ChatGPT is going to make possible, is that you can type in stuff and it gives you a draft instantly. And you'll be able to iterate drafts so rapidly in the repetition process. And I think it's going to supercharge the ABT framework, everything we worked on. So I've spent the past week working intensely with it. And just yesterday, the new 4.0 version came out, which is even more exciting and more powerful and rapid. So that's going to be a major part of our future. And I think is very, very cool. Okay, on that note, then, it is time to just hand the reins over to Park Howell with this special episode of his. All about the ABT, and you'll hear a whole wide range of voices, and it's really, really well edited. So it's a great thing to listen to, and I'll check back with you at the end of it all. So have fun.
Hello and welcome to this special 400th anniversary edition of the Business of Story. I can't believe it, already 400 shows. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I always like to celebrate a landmark episode like this one by sharing with you insights about storytelling I've learned over the 8 years of producing our show. Today, you will learn from many, many mentors, podcast guests, clients, and friends that will show you how to leverage the ABT Agile Narrative Framework to grow your business, your people, and the impact in the world you seek to help you excel through the stories you tell. Look, believe it or not, this is all about you. And I want to thank you for listening, coming back if you're a repeat listener, and sharing our shows, with your friends, family, colleagues, anybody who wants to learn how to use storytelling in their world. Could be a student, could be a parent, could be a teacher, could be a business leader, marketing expert, sales, legend, you name it. That's why we're here. Now, my first anniversary show was episode 101, where I covered how you can tell your stories on purpose. I mean, after all, if your brand doesn't stand for something, then it won't stand out. And you can find a link to this particular episode and all of the shows that I mentioned today in our show notes. Anniversary episode number 250 is when I launched my new book, Brand Bewitchery, How to Wield the Story Cycle System to Craft Spellbinding Stories for Your Brand. In this episode, I had a lot of fun with the production as I take you through my origin story to show you what you can learn from the trials and tribulations I went through to really figure out how to make storytelling work in our lives. In episode 300, I share the top 10 storytelling tips that will ignite your sales. These are the proven sales storytelling techniques I learned early in my career producing hundreds of radio commercials. You'll hear some of the spots that illustrate the sales storytelling points that I make and how you can use these proven techniques in all of your sales, marketing, presentations, keynotes, websites, even your email outreach, so you actually get a response from your prospects. In our last anniversary show, episode 350, I take you through our 10-step story cycle system. The first 15 minutes is a quick review of this proven brand narrative creation process, followed by a more in-depth look, including exercises you can use right now in your business storytelling. So you can check that out in episode 350. But today, we're boiling it all down to how and why you should consider using the 3 simple words of and, but, and therefore, or the ABT, which I call the DNA of story. It's the building block for all of your storytelling because it builds your narrative intuition. And when you build that, you will revolutionize how you communicate and, even more importantly, how you connect and excite your audiences to action. In this special 400th anniversary episode, you will hear clips from several of our past shows that will feature the amazing minds that are using the ABT every day and how they use it so you can too. They're going to show you. Let's start with the guy who taught me this messaging marvel, Dr. Randy Olson, who I co-wrote the book with, The Narrative Gym for Business, to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. This is from episode number 318, titled The One Narrative Framework You Need for Effective Business Storytelling.
For 1 century, the people of Hollywood have been trying to understand the brains of the public. And I went to film school in the mid-90s at the University of Southern California Film School. The very first course we had to take there was the history of silent cinema. And they had us read articles that were written back in the 1920s that were about studies trying to figure out how audiences reacted to movies, because they had a huge incentive, which is to make money, but they haven't shared it with the general public. They've kept it inside of Hollywood. And I think that's a lot of the mission that I set off in the mid-90s was I left the science world wondering, especially in the wake of the movie Jurassic Park, which, it changed the science world. Suddenly, everybody was interested in paleontology and dinosaurs. Why? Because of one movie that Hollywood had produced. That's how much they knew how to reprogram the brains of the masses. So that fascinated me. I went to film school, and I set out looking for the Holy Grail. What is the one element at the core of all of this stuff that Hollywood does that explains how it is they understand the public's brain so well? Maybe one of the kind of sad things is that I've spent a decade trying to get the science world to grasp this, but it's gaining steam there. And as you know, Park, you're part of my ABT Framework course. You do the business segment within there, and the ABT Framework course has taken off now, and we're booked all the way into next year, working with big organizations like the National Park Service and FAA, Federal Aviation Administration. Who else? Lots of organizations, U.S. Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife, on and on. So they're getting it, and it's very powerful for communication. But the community that picks this stuff up much more quickly is the business world. And you and I did one little run of the course last year for business folks, and just based on that, we saw it taking off. And in fact, 2 months ago, I think I was on the podcast of your friend Francisco Mafus. Is that his name, in Spain? And
I think you got that right.
And then David, sorry, what's his last name? Poland. From the UK got in touch with me, and he said, a bunch of us over here have been using this ABT thing. We didn't know where it came from. And then we heard you on that podcast, like, oh, that's the guy with the ABT. I mean, when I talk to somebody like David and Francisco, it is such a joy for me, because with the science people, they're constantly pushing back. Well, I don't know if we really need this, and I don't know if we should be trying to, worry about what the public thinks. But the business folks, it all starts there. If we don't listen to the public, we're not going to get anywhere. So it's such a joy to work with the business folks. This book that we've got here, The Narrative Gym, I wrote it last fall in broad form in November, and now you and I have decided to put it inside the context of the business world. And you did a great job writing the 7th chapter. You gave 5 applications of how the ABT framework applies to the business world.
And this thing came together pretty quickly in about the last month or so. And just rewriting your first book so it is specific to sales, marketing, and business folk. And we're already getting some really great reviews. Our good friend Greg Head, Scaling Point, Greg's List, he's been through our course. He is a believer. Here's what he said on LinkedIn yesterday.
This is Greg, the master of memes.
Yes. The Greg, the master of memes. I should maybe put some of those in our show notes, but only the R-rated ones.
He was one of the very best participants ever in the course, because after every session, within about 15 minutes, he'd send us 3 or 4 memes that he threw together with things that he heard in our lectures. So he's awesome.
Well, he wrote on LinkedIn, he said, the ABT is gold. It is the most powerful framework for communication that I have ever used. Thanks for your podcast, blog posts, and workshops that led up to this book about the ABT. And, Greg has been in the marketing world for almost 4 decades, as long as I have, as a brilliant marketer, and he has seen everything. So to have that come from him is really powerful. But let's talk a little bit about what we often hear, that the ABT, the and button, therefore, is so simple. Can it possibly work? Why does it work, Randy?
Well, here's the first silly thing that comes to mind is, you remember that classic iconic scene from Spinal Tap with the guy with the amplifier that goes to 11.
Oh, yeah.
And Rob Reiner keeps asking him, most people's amplifiers just go to 10. How's this one different? And he says, because ours goes to 11. And I think the same way about the ABT, which is because we have a model. Nobody else has a model. We have a model, the ABT Framework. And I'd be thrilled to hear somebody else's comparable model, but there just ain't one out there. And this is the only model. And it's this simple model, but then as you read the book, you see that it provides what we mean by framework is that you can hang on it a bunch of other elements. You can add things on and get into all kinds of complexity, but you want to start with simplicity, and that's what the ABT gives you, is all the way down to the core elements of the 3 forces behind these words, and, but, and therefore. And the 3 forces that everybody needs to learn and develop an intuitive feel for are agreement, contradiction, and consequence, and realize that effective communication begins with agreement. Doesn't begin with your problem, doesn't begin with yelling at people and things like that. It begins by figuring out, what have we got here that we can agree upon? Now let's do the turn here and start the narrative process.
It's always fun to hear from my good friend, Dr. Randy Olson, the guy that really developed the ABT in the science and academic world. And I simply have taken his work and translated it over into the business world to great effect. And remember, you can listen to that entire show and all these shows. Just go to the show notes. You're going to find a link there for you. But why do you need the ABT? Well, a startling report on the cost of miscommunication came out about this time last year. It was produced by the Harris Poll in Grammarly, and it showed that miscommunication is costing American businesses $1.2 trillion annually, which equates to 1 lost day of productivity per person per week. Ouch. So I invited Abby Lunny of the Harris Poll on the show to talk about their findings. One thing that caught my attention is that they actually used the ABT framework in the writing of the report, and they didn't even know it. The lesson for you here is that we are all intuitive storytellers. My goal is to make you a much more impactful, intentional storyteller using the ABT. That way you're not just out there winging it, but you're winning it every single time. Check it out. In your communication, in your studying here, where you looked at a lot of miscommunication and the cost of it, did you guys dive in at all about actually, and being, Grammarly being a sponsor of this, of course, that's their primary role of just formulating powerful communication. Not so much when and where you communicate, but how you communicate.
Yeah, we did see that people are looking for tools to help them with that. And they're not just looking for something to correct their typos, right? They're looking for something to help with that empathy, with the clarity, with the overall story that they're trying to tell. And I know my role with thought leadership research is very much using data, which is something that's quite can be quite dry in some scenarios, and telling stories around it and making it really interesting. And it's definitely a discipline that we work in all the time. And so I think the ability to kind of craft narratives is more essential now than ever before, especially if you've got to engage people on their like 6th Zoom call of the day and get them excited about something when you can't build energy in the room and they're so tired of looking at their screens.
You know, Abby, that's the one thing that struck me about your poll. Well, several things have, but I think that you all do a really good job with your narrative to bring these numbers to life. And in fact, I'll even just give you a little kudos here, because I don't see this very often. On page 3, this is the executive summary. You actually use a framework that we teach called the and, but, therefore. You probably didn't even realize this, but you are using the 3 forces of story of agreement, contradiction, and consequence in your first 3 paragraphs that set up your entire report. Did you realize you did this?
No, not at all. That I will take the kudos and keep trying to implement that framework.
Well, let me read it to you. So everyone can hear this too. And what I teach too is, look, your team there are good intuitive communicators and storytellers. So you use these, and my argument is everybody is an intuitive storyteller who is a Homo sapien, and that is anybody sitting across from you virtually or in the room. What I like to teach them is how to become intentional about it. So you guys started this with a statement of agreement, and it begins: seamlessly work from home of #work from anywhere. Access secure documents from any network. Hire the best talent based anywhere in the world from wherever you are. So that's all very aspirational, right? It's a statement of agreement. You're getting your audience to nod and say, yeah, that's exactly what I want. But now you use the trigger word but. Here's the conflict. Here's the contradiction. But what if we don't realize any of those benefits because we can't communicate with each other effectively? So what you've done there, the 3 forces of stories, you began with agreement. Here's what a brighter future looks like to us. Then you have contradiction, but you don't currently have it because we're doing a lousy job of communicating. Therefore, here's the consequence of this study. The Grammarly State of Business Communication Report seeks to answer a fundamental question. What is getting in the way of collaboration, productivity, and employee experience in the hybrid work era? So, congratulations, because if I was to coach you on how I would set up this report summary, that's exactly what I would do. And that is the first framework we teach anybody anywhere, no matter how they're communicating, is get this and, but, therefore down. Use these 3 forces of story, because it does make you empathize with your audience, because you're placing your reader at the center of the story, right? It's getting you super clear on what you're solving for. You know, you want this hybrid workforce, but the miscommunication is making it not work for you as effectively as it could. And then you have the answer to it, the call to action. Therefore, here's the report for you to understand where maybe you're missing the bet and what you can do about it.
Yeah, that's a great framework. And I would give kudos also to the Grammarly team. This was very much a group effort in terms of developing the report. But I love that. I think the idea, to me, the most interesting part is the but. I think we're always looking for research that sets up tension in a way that can kind of grab people and maybe surprise them. So I love that idea of kind of establishing a shared vision, demonstrating maybe an obstacle or a contradiction, and then showing how you could help them pave a path forward. I love it.
We had a follow-up episode, show number 367, with Dorian Stone from Grammarly on how to use agile communications to scale your growth. If you'd like a deeper dive in how to overcome miscommunication in your business, check it out, show number 367. Now, when it comes to using the ABT to help you design and own your market category, there's no better person to hear from than that legendary Silicon Valley marketer, the host of Lockheed on Marketing podcast, the pirate of category design, Christopher Lockhead, who joined me on episode number 351.
Can you give us an example of your whys? Like what's the first why you begin with when you start challenging and or rejecting a premise?
Okay, so tell me something you believe.
All right, well, let's attack the premise of the and button, therefore. I do believe that this is the starting point for all powerful communication if you want to be a storyteller.
Okay, great. Why do you believe the ABT is the most powerful starting point for being a storyteller?
Because I backed into it from all the complexity of the hero's journey and the 15 steps this and the 9 steps that, and I tried to teach that stuff for a decade only to see it just bouncing off people's heads in the audience, and I was realizing they're not getting this and or they don't care. They don't want to be story theorists. They want just the most basic thing that they can use to make them become a more powerful communicator.
And why did you learn that after 10 years of digging into that work?
It took me that long. I guess I'm dense. I'm a little bit slow. It was going from the complexity of everything that I was learning, applying it, that I too kept trying to find easier ways to communicate it and actually easier ways to activate it in people's lives and including my own life.
And why did you come to the conclusion that that was a demarcation point for you and for others?
Because I started doing the research and finding the ABT throughout history, literally working alongside Dr. Randy Olson, who was the one that introduced me to it when I was looking at it from an evolutionary standpoint, and I'm looking at it in communications from a political standpoint and branding and marketing. To me, there was a truth in this, that it's about those 3 forces of story. Agreement, to get your audience leaning in. Contradiction, to pique their interest on, okay, so what's the resolution? And then, of course, the resolution or the consequence of that brings it full circle. To me, it made sense. And when I started seeing its ubiquity in communication across time, it was like it became a no-brainer to me.
And why did you choose the ABT framework as opposed to, there are other mental frameworks for how to write compelling things and how to write compelling story?
It's the one that hit me, I assume, at the right time back in 2013 when I was really digging into all this stuff. And Chris, there was just something about all of my work over the years in branding, taking a complex branding message and trying to make it simple and failing a lot at that, but then having some success and reading lots of people on it, that when I saw the ABT, it was an aha moment for me. It's like, oh, this is it. This is what I've been looking for.
And as you see what we're doing here, I could ask you why a whole bunch more times and we'd still have more to talk about. So the aha for me is we start by rejecting the premise, but we do it, in this case, politely. This is something you believe in deeply. So I'm not rejecting it like, oh, F you. I'm coming from a curiosity perspective. Most people think the purpose of a conversation or a dialogue is to win. If you ultimately surrender your position and adopt mine, that's when I had a great conversation and vice versa. And so what most people call dialogue is actually called waiting to talk. And what most people are waiting to talk about is their opinion, and their purpose in sharing their opinion is to get you to agree. The more powerful one is a curiosity one, is a why one. Why do you believe that? Why is that important to you? How did you learn that? Why did you come to that conclusion? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if I move aside my own personal opinion and I reject my own premise, maybe I even start with rejecting your premise. I reject all of it and just stand in a place of pure curiosity. As pure, look, we all have our biases. Of course we do. But as pure as you can get yourself to be and say, okay, well, why does this guy bet his whole fucking career on this thing called ABT? And is he super smart? Is he super stupid?
What, Chris, did you learn from your whying of me around the ABT?
So you gave me a gift with the ABT because, and you and I have talked about this before on both of our podcasts, in category design, we have this thing called a POV, a point of view. And it is simply structured very similarly to that of the ABT, which is essentially, and this is such a profound insight, it sounds like it's nothing, just like the ABT. It's so simple, you can't imagine how profound it is. But it goes like, in a point of view, it goes like this. Nobody buys a solution until they have a fucking problem. And so a point of view starts with articulating, framing, naming, and claiming a problem. And it could be an opportunity, so it doesn't have to be a negative always, but it's an insight. It's an aha. It's a, to quote the Big Lebowski, it's a "this aggression will not stand, man." It is what you could think of as a different future. Legendary creators, entrepreneurs, and marketers become obsessed. They become missionaries with creating a different future. You know, one of my favorite examples, living here in Santa Cruz, Jack O'Neill, the category designer of the surf wetsuit. And when you buy a wetsuit from O'Neill, I don't know if it's still the case, but it was for years, there's a picture of Jack on it and a quote that said, "I'm just a surfer who wanted to surf longer." Well, if you're a surfer and you ever surfed in Northern California and you went out there with board shorts and a wool sweater, which is what people did before Jack came along, you can relate to that because you probably if you got 45 minutes in that, you're doing well. It's fucking cold. And so this problem called, "Hey, I wanted to surf longer." Well, we can relate to that problem. That then sets up the solution. And when people understand the problem/opportunity, then they become interested in the solution. And then, of course, the third piece from a POV perspective is how your product or service, or your idea for that matter, you might not be actually marketing or selling anything, bridges the gap between the problem/opportunity and therefore the solution. Okay, so with all that said, why do I love the ABT? The ABT takes the thinking that we did around points of view and does a fantastic, legendary double click on it and says, here is a shit simple, insanely powerful way to write an instant POV. And that's why the and, but, and therefore model is pure genius. It allows you to relate to people. Then it gives them the but, which tees up the problem. And then the therefore, which points the way to the different future, aka solution. And so it's pure genius. And it's easily rememberable. And if you start to play with it, as I have since you taught it to me, just like anything else, you develop some prowess with it, it starts working. It's almost weird how this works.
So Lockheed makes a pretty compelling argument about why you need to design your own category and own it, because the first person in that category is typically the winner as long as you can defend it. If you're ready to hear the ABT in action on how you can get super focused on your core brand story and design your strategy, let's go to renowned international sales strategist for CEOs, Alice Hyman, from episode 320, entitled "The Stories CEOs Are Telling That Prevent Sales." Alice is the daughter of who some call one of the grandfathers of sales training, Stephen Hyman, who with Robert Miller created the Miller-Hyman training system. Alice worked with them to turn all of their knowledge into one of the first training systems ever available. But when she left Miller-Hyman after 3 years, when they sold the company, she found herself to be a generalist, and that wasn't working for her. So here's her story, how she dialed in her particular category design, her unique brand statement using the and, but, therefore.
When I left Miller-Hyman, I was actually only there 3 years because at that time, my dad had decided that he was going to sell the company. And he and my stepmom had bought the business from Bob Miller, I don't know, in the late 80s, and then had really grown it tremendously. But they just decided, okay, we're not going to be the ones to take it to the next level. And they sold it to a private equity firm. So knowing that, I had left and started my own company, sort of accidentally. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur, although I'm very entrepreneurial and always have been. But I sort of fell into it and started working in the .com with all of these companies that were funded and really needed rapid growth. And that's how I really got into working with CEOs to help them grow their company and grow the valuation. But I sort of thought of myself and positioned myself as a sales generalist, because although I would work with a CEO, and usually I would start the conversation with a senior sales leader of some type, and then I would meet the CEO and we'd work out what the strategy would be and what needed to be done. So I've been doing things the same way for a long time, although, 20 plus years ago, I would spend more time with the sales team and I would actually provide some training and do some of the things that I don't do now. Like I would coach the salespeople and coach frontline sales managers. And over the many years, what I realized is all of the work that I did just didn't make enough difference if the CEO wasn't on board with the vision for sales, the direction, really on board with who the customer was, and really able to support sales in the way that was needed, either with funding or with organizational structure or with more people or helping marketing and sales and customer success work together. If they weren't able to do those things, all the training and all the coaching that I did only moved them a very small amount forward. And so I would spend more and more time with the CEO and the senior leaders, but I had never repositioned myself. And so even though I was doing that, I wasn't really attracting the audience that I really wanted to work with, because I looked like a sales generalist on my website, on all my social media. And people would be like, oh, you do sales training, or, oh, you do marketing, or, oh, you do. And I'd be like, no. But it's my own fault because I didn't brand myself well.
Yeah, it's always easier to do that for other people, isn't it, than to take our own advice, take our own medicine, and do it for ourselves. So we did arrive at really, I feel like, a very powerful position for you in the sales world. And God knows there's multitudes of sales professionals out there. And so it's even more important in this day and age to focus anyone's brand story. And at the core of yours, we begin with the and button, therefore, when we understand what position you really hold in the marketplace that makes you more distinctive, different than your customers. And off of that ABT, we build everything else. So we need to roll out for our listeners, Alice Hyman's ABT.
I feel really good about the positioning we ended up with because it truly does speak directly to the CEO as the primary target audience, which is who I've always had as my primary target. But let me read it to you all. As CEO, you have positioned your company for tremendous growth, but sales are lackluster because the strategy you support won't get you there. Therefore, Alice Hyman will help you define the precise strategy based on your values to easily elevate sales and increase your valuation.
Bam! Nicely done.
Love it, right? And I think, you really helped me with some of the words when we went through all those exercises and picked out the words. It made a huge difference because I'm not just working with any CEOs. I'm working with CEOs who want tremendous growth and can have it. The marketplace is there and they can have that growth if they can get their sales strategy to support it, right? But their results aren't what they want right now. And I also loved when we started when elevate, you said elevate, that's what you do. You elevate sales. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's exactly it. It's like, take it to the next level. And then, of course, what most CEOs want is a higher valuation for their company because then they have freedom and many, many choices, right? So they can either borrow money, they can go find investors, they can hire more people, they can exit their company, they can leave a healthy company to the next generation. They just have so many more choices when the valuation is there and it's supported by the sales. So I feel really good about the positioning and about this ABT that was so painful for me, but now I love it.
If you're struggling with telling your authentic brand story, start using the ABT right now to clarify your story, amplify your impact, and simplify your life. Here are the steps. Number 1, identify your number one audience as Alice did. Hers, of course, are CEOs. 2, then articulate what they want relative to your offering and define why it's important to them. You want to raise the stakes right there. So you have this shared vision of a brighter tomorrow for them. But what is their problem you are going to solve for them? What is keeping them up at night, and because of what? Therefore, what will a brighter tomorrow look like for them, and how are you uniquely equipped, better than anyone else, to help them get it? That's the basic primal ABT right there. Now, one of the questions I get is that the ABT might be great for brand story creation and sales, but where else can I use it? The answer is in all of your messaging, from your social posts to your landing pages to focusing your presentations and long-form communications. I just received this testimonial from Jim Fritzmeyer, who uses the ABT in his emails to keep from getting ghosted.
Hey, Park. Hey, thanks for your reaching out, and it just gives me an opportunity to thank you for the ABT system. And I've used it in several different instances. One that I'm using it right now is to contact past customers of ours, and I will just read the email I'm sending out. Hi, Chris. Aero Pump was a past customer of ours, but you have not seen our latest product and price offering. Interested? Please reply to see what you're missing out on. Here's to a great 2023. And after I send that out, I would follow up with a call and go, hey, Chris, did you see my email? Just want to talk to you about being a past customer and not seeing our latest price and product offering. Love to send you the pricing and some samples. What do you think? And we just go from there. So, again, thank you very much. Simple, efficient, just works great. Thank you.
Another cool place I just learned about using the ABT is in selling Girl Scout cookies, of all things. You see, I had recently completed a training for 200 of Master Electronics sales and marketing team for their annual revenue kickoff. And one of their director of sales, Christian Stanchu, went home and taught his daughter, Sienna, how to use it in her Girl Scout cookie video pitch. Check it out.
Hello, my name is Sienna and I'm in Troop 42755. Girl Scouts is important to me because it teaches me many life skills. The money from cookie sales pays for camping trips, and I learn about sales and marketing. But to reach my goal, I would like to sell 400 boxes of cookies, which would go a long way towards funding many activities for my troop. Therefore, please consider either purchasing or donating a box or more and have it shipped or request Girl Scout delivery. Thank you.
That's not only adorable, but powerful. And I've learned since that Sienna is already well over the halfway point of selling her 400 boxes of cookies. Pretty sweet, huh? Okay, let's move on to when you find yourself having to persuade an extraordinarily difficult audience. No better place to turn than to internationally acclaimed sentence mitigation attorney Doug Passon, who co-authored the third book in the Narrative Gym series called The Narrative Gym for Law. If you want to know how to persuade a judge and jury or any difficult crowd, episode number 341 is for you. Here's Doug and how he is bringing the powerful ABT narrative framework to his law practice, to his defense practice, and to his sentence mitigation work. Doug, welcome back to the show.
It's good to be here, Park. Thanks for having me.
You know, you and I met a couple years ago. You were on show number 182, entitled How Defense Attorneys Use Cinematic Storytelling to Reduce Sentences. And it was a fascinating show. A friend of mine introduced me to you and your work. And about that same time, the New York Times had come out and covered your work, and kind of in a disparaging tone, if you will, the fact that you were using storytelling as a defense attorney to help mitigate sentences for people. How did you get into that storytelling world in the first place?
Well, all my life, there was only a couple of things that I ever saw myself being or doing. One was lawyer, the other was filmmaker, believe it or not. And I was making movies in high school. This is back before we even had digital video. So, 2 VCRs strung together to edit. And I don't know what it was about movies, but being in a theater and that space and being totally transported through story, it was my refuge. It was like one of my favorite places to be in the whole world. It was more of just a love affair with movies throughout my young life. And then when I was getting through college and I was deciding what was next, it was either going to be law school or film school. I picked law school, but the film stuff never left me. Parallel tracks to learning the law. I was reading books on story and screenwriting, story structure, and Campbell and the hero's journey. And really, really, really soon into my legal journey, I figured out that those two were going to intersect in a very powerful way, because that's really all we're doing. We get a case, we have a problem to solve, and the way we do it is by telling a story. The two became a totally natural fit for me. At some point, I got into documentary filmmaking, and then at some point, I started making these short documentaries for my cases.
And we're going to get back to that in a minute, because it's pretty fascinating, the work you've done, and especially sentence mitigation videos. But you have just come out with a new book with our mutual good friend, Dr. Randy Olson, The Narrative Gem for Law. I've been going through your book. I absolutely love it because it's given me a whole bunch of new examples that I can use to demonstrate the ABT in action as a persuasive tool. And I can't imagine a tougher audience than a judge or a jury that you are trying to see your side of the story as you are defending someone people suggest have broken the law, and in some cases have broken the law, but maybe don't require the sentence that is going to be handed down. Let's talk about the ABT and how you have found it so powerful, and beginning with that fun clip we had up top with the 21 Jump Street that you shared with me, and how the whole Miranda rights things falls into this.
Yeah. So, well, before we get there, I have to, you're modest, but I have to give you more props than you're giving yourself, because I'm a Malcolm Gladwell fan, and he would call you, Park Howell, a connector. You have this power of not only connecting the dots between various disciplines, but connecting people. So I regularly listen to your podcast, and you've had Randy Olson on a few times. And when I heard him talk about the ABT, the light went on. Maybe it was because I've been swimming in these waters for so long and been looking so long for a really concrete, dare I say, simple way to express story structure. I was totally blown away. So I got the narrative gem, which was the original thing. And then when I saw you came out with the business version, I decided I was going to make it my mission to stalk Randy through you and convince him to co-author the law version with me. And it wasn't really a hard sell, but I was so grateful that you connected me and that he agreed to do it. We're just rolling it out, but I think it's going to be a game changer for my legal community, for my colleagues.
And I'll say, when I was writing the narrative gem for business with Randy, it also, through our conversations and prepping for that, brought up other instances of using the ABT in business, as it did for you guys in the ABT, the narrative gem for law, because you both then came to the realization, I think, through your prodding, that the Miranda rights is written as an and, which is non-narrative, and maybe be one of the reasons why it gets ignored by people to their detriment, because they say things without an attorney in the room that they should not be saying, and it is indeed held against them in the court of law.
Yep.
So that's why we started the show with that bit from 21 Jump Street. Let's jump into that.
So we were thinking about examples in the legal world, and that hit us kind of like a lightning bolt. And I think what really sparked the idea is how the ABT is about the problem solution dynamic, solving problems. And I was thinking about what's one of the biggest problems I face in my job as a criminal defense lawyer. And that is, even though we have Miranda, and even though the police are obligated to inform people that they have a right not to talk, they always talk. They always talk every single time. And then it hit me. What is Miranda? Miranda is non-narrative. So if you talk about narrative being persuasive, then the obvious corollary is non-narrative is unpersuasive, right? And it's all and material. And if you look at the Miranda rights, you have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to a lawyer, and if you choose to speak to police, those can be used against you. And, if you can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed you. And, period. And we know that when we speak just in non-narrative, which is the and land, if you will, it tends to go in one ear and out the other. And I think that's exactly what's happening. So we posit this scenario. What if police, it's a whole nother discussion whether this is intentional or not, Park, because let's face it, police, as important as they are and as good as most of them they are, they're not really in the business of convincing you not to talk to them, right? They want you to talk to them, right?
They're not exactly on your side.
Well, yeah. So, if you invoke Miranda, it makes their job more difficult because a lot of times it's your words that are used to make the case. But anyway, in the book, we posit, what if the police did the Miranda rights in ABT form? How would that go? Because it's certainly more persuasive, and it's you have the right to remain silent and the right to a lawyer, but if you choose to speak to the police, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Therefore, you shouldn't speak to law enforcement without first talking to a lawyer.
And you think that would make a huge difference out there?
I think it would. I think it would make a huge difference. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in the distant future or ever. But here's my ABT about why it should happen. You ready? Americans value the Constitution and the many rights and protections it affords us. And the Supreme Court continued this tradition by mandating that police have to inform a suspect of their Miranda rights before trying to interrogate them about an alleged crime. But because law enforcement officers communicate these crucial rights in non-narrative form, citizens routinely give up their rights without fully understanding the consequences. Therefore, if the goal is to truly better protect a citizen's constitutional rights, law enforcement should change the form in which they deliver this message. What do you think?
And that form should be an and, but, and therefore.
Exactly,
ABT, right?
Exactly. 100%.
Power to the people, Doug. Power to the people.
100%.
So hopefully you never find yourself sitting across Joe Friday and he's reading you your Miranda rights. But if you do, remember to filter it through your ABT and mum's the word. Wait for your attorney to get there. Now let's hear from 3 more communication professionals on how the ABT has impacted their careers in leadership development, the startup community, and the media, respectively.
I always loved the art and the science of marketing. Plus, I always relished the opportunity to communicate clearly as a marketer. But I sometimes found my clear communications to be a bit lengthy. That is, until I found the ABT method, also known as the and but therefore method, through Park Howell and the Business of Story. So now my communications are clear, they're concise, and memorable. Thank you so much, Park Howell and the Business of Story.
Hi, I'm Greg Head. In the last 30 years, I've been growing little software company startups into larger software companies as an entrepreneur and marketer. And these days, the biggest problem for little tech startups is getting enough attention in the world and then converting that attention into happy customers and growing revenues. It's a communication problem. We all know that storytelling is at the heart of communications and sales and marketing. But I've always struggled with complex storytelling processes. It's just hard for me to wrap my head around 15 or 7 or 9 step storytelling models, even though I know how it works, which is why my world changed when Park Howell introduced to me the ABT 3-step magical storytelling process that always works. It's the most powerful communication tool and process I've ever used. I use it every day in my companies, and with the tech startups I work with, and I see it in every message that makes its way through to me outside in the world. So I recommend that you connect with Park and the business and learn about the ABT from the business story and use it. Everybody could use it in your business when you're communicating anything to anybody. Check it out. Did you see how I used the ABT there? Good luck.
Hey, Park, I just got your story prompt video, and I know you know this story, but I've been in the media and marketing game for 35, 40 years, and I've probably conducted hundreds of marketing strategy sessions and branding sessions and positioning exercises and workshops, and I've employed and deployed lots of different frameworks over the years to help facilitate my clients. But I can tell you with certainty, the ABT process that you taught me is by far the most effective and the fastest way to get to message clarity. You know, that old saying, genius is making the complex simple. Well, I think that's the ABT to me, and therefore I use it on every assignment I'm on with a client now, right from the start.
Now, just imagine how you can move the world in any direction you choose by using these three little words: and, but, and therefore. It seems so simple, right? The ABT is short and sweet, but it's tricky, man. So you got to practice it, and practice it some more to make your complex messages simply digestible. Okay, we started this show with Randy talking about how difficult science communication is when scientists are locked in their big thinking, logic, and reason-driven brains. Renowned American social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who appeared on episode 183, which we called How Your Stories Can Unite Divided People, says that the human mind is a story processor, not a logic processor. So we explored this idea with Drs. Marlis Douglas and Keisha Barr, who wrote with Randy the Narrative Gym for Science Graduate Students and Postdocs. Despite that big title, I want you to think of this. Regardless if you're in leadership, branding, marketing, sales, human resources, sustainability, or science, and you feel your communications are cluttered with logic and reason and not impacting the audiences the way you hope to, then their insights on episode number 388, How to Turn Your Nerd Speak into Business Solutions with the ABT, are definitely for you.
We wrote this book in, was it 3 weeks or a month? It was very fast, very intense, right in the middle of my fieldwork season. But, you know, having that team, having Marlis, having Randy, we really played off each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we pulled this thing together. And now we're hoping it's a resource not only for graduate students, but also for postdocs or anyone else who wants to learn about the ABT framework. And it has more specific ways to really implement the ABT into different ways and different trainings.
And Marlis, this book is very specific on the title. So, for instance, my book with Randy was The Narrative Gym for Business. Doug Poisson's book was The Narrative Gym for Law. Yours isn't just the Narrative Gym for Science, but for science graduate students and postdocs. How did you arrive at that specific title?
You know, scientific training takes a very long time. You do a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD. Probably you're 15 years in school, and you learn all the technical aspects, how to analyze data, how to collect data, how to do scientific writing. But what you really don't learn is life skills, or, you know, kind of dealing with normal people, non-scientists, the rest of the world. And in my own research, having to deal with a lot of, agency folks and stakeholders and so on, and trying to relate my research to people who are not scientists, how do I talk to them? So communicating with diverse audiences is really very essential for today's scientists, for their training. And it really isn't done. There is really not a simple framework as simple as the ABT. As you work with grad students, and for example, we try to teach them how to an elevator pitch, you know, like you do in business, kind of at the conference, you know, what do? And so they can just very briefly explain, well, I'm working on this, but this is the problem, and therefore I'm looking for this solution.
You know, in our line of work, I always talk about with business leaders and sales and marketing folks that their job is to make the complex simple so that their prospect, their buyer, their customer, their colleagues can immediately get it through that singular narrative of the ABT. And it just makes the whole sales process so much easier when your audience doesn't have to fight for meaning. Keisha, when did you recognize the ABT? Can you take us to that moment where you went, wow, I didn't know that this existed, and I've got to do a deeper dive on to see how I exactly can use it in my work?
Well, I want to be more effective because I want to create change, like Marlis was saying. I want to raise awareness that our coral reefs are dying. And I'm not very effective at doing that because it's all doom and gloom. Like, working with corals is so challenging. They're dying. It's not working. We need to make change. So I learned about the ABT from Randy directly. And then I started going back and reading more about his books and more of the development of ABT following that training. And it was in the first class that I took with him where I was like, oh my gosh, I have been doing everything completely wrong. I start out with the negatives. I use bigger words than I should when communicating with people. And I kind of go in all these different directions, and it's hard for my audience to follow me. And I didn't really realize that until when Randy broke down the ABT and talked about the contradiction and talked about the setup and the solution. I was like, oh my gosh, I actually kind of felt a little embarrassed that I had been such a terrible communicator up until that moment.
Yeah, but you're a passionate, creative scientist, but you're never taught how to communicate, correct? I mean, even in the business world, when I first saw the hero's journey and what Hollywood knew about storytelling, which then led me to the 5 primal elements of a short story, which ultimately led me to the and, but, therefore, these 3 powerful words that play off the 3 forces of story, of agreement, contradiction, consequence. And that was in 2011 in Randy's second book, Connection. That was my aha moment. I'm like, oh my God, could this thing really be that powerful? It was, like the golden chalice in branding to make a complex message simple. And that was my wow. Okay. And then Randy and I became fast friends and have gotten to work together now in the past decade. Marlis, when was your aha moment with the ABT in the complex science world, making your messages simple, digestible, land right the first time?
I think my journey started a very long time ago, actually, when I finished my master's. And one day, and we relate this story in the book, one day my mom asked, so I just probably came home for Thanksgiving dinner, and she said, so tell me, what did you do for your master's? And I was super excited telling my mom, and so I started, I'm studying baby fish, and they have little experiments in the lake, and I have to wear thermal underwear type of layers in the dry suit, and it's very cold. The water is 6 degrees Celsius, and it's freezing cold, and I have to go down there, and and then the results were, all the baby fish died, but that wasn't a really big deal because and I used a very fancy term we're using evolutionary biology, basically. So anyway, I had all this exciting stuff, used a lot of jargon, blah, blah, blah. And then I finished and, expectantly looked at the mom, and she looked at me and just said, and people find this interesting? And I was really, Mom! But this really made me realize that if somebody who really loves you, he's really genuinely interested in what you do, and you cannot communicate what you actually do, you have a problem.
All right, Keisha, can I put you on the spot?
Yes, of course.
In 1 minute, how would you explain the ABT to them?
So I would first start out really, really broad. Coral reefs are really important. They provide these services, but they're threatened because of these changes that are occurring in our oceans. Therefore, I am investigating how do we reduce these impacts that we have. And then from there, I actually take a nested approach, start very, very broad, and based on the feedback and the interaction I have with Marlis or the neighbor, I would go into more detail to see and kind of evaluate how much information do they know or what they don't know, and then kind of pivot in that direction. So if she was like, well, what do you mean by corals? Then I would kind of go into more details about what exactly corals are and how they build these large structures, but we really don't understand how they build those structures and what kind of conditions they need. Therefore, we're looking into that, and so on and so forth. So I would say that I take a nested ABT approach when I talk to anyone, actually, about my research. I start really, really broad, because then that builds that bridge, that common ground between us. And then it allows you to kind of pivot and step in deeper, or kind of sidestep to what kind of information do they need, or how are they receiving that information based on what they give back to me. So that back and forth of listening for them.
Now, Marlis, how do you quickly explain the structure and the use of the ABT so that it lands and they get it right away without them pushing back and saying, I'm already too smart for this stuff. I don't need that stupid 3 little word story framework. It can't possibly work.
Scientists are in general very curious and creative. And if we would be good at storytelling, then we could translate this creativity, this curiosity, to help solve the world's problems. But we as scientists are really bad at storytelling because we're too detail-oriented, too nerdy, too focused on details. So therefore, we really have to learn a new approach, how we can better communicate our science to other scientists and also to anybody else. And the ABT provides this framework because it tells us what information to provide, be very specific, very simple, one issue at a time, what context to place it in so that it matters. Just focus on this one issue, and then they explain what we can do about it and how we can do about this. And this structure basically helps you structure an elevator pitch, a presentation, an entire dissertation, because it really tells you what to put in, how to structure it, in what format, and how to pitch it in a positive or negative way.
Well, we covered a lot of ground today, didn't we? That's what you do in a 400th anniversary episode, and I hope you found it helpful and workable in your life. I'm happy to close this anniversary show with Dana Mouthstaff of Boss Mom, who introduced me last year during my storytelling presentation at Social Media Marketing World, where I'll appear again this year with my presentation, How to Sell More by Saying Less with the ABT. Dana came on the show for episode number 368 to explore how to use agile storytelling to build engaged communities for specialty. Here's what she has to say about the ABT after experiencing my workshop.
Hey, Dana Malstaff here from Boss Mom, and I absolutely love using the ABT method. Park is brilliant. It simplifies a way for me to look at what I'm saying and actually say it in a way that entices my audience to take action and fall in love with everything I'm doing. The ABT is indispensable in my business. My clients love it. I was actually just on a call before this with, I'm doing a coaching certification right now for girls. And one of them said, she's like, oh, you're going to get on with Park? She's like, I loved that thing. She's like, the ABT, I've totally started using it. Everybody I tell about it loves it, and you should love it too.
If you happen to be in San Diego this year for Social Media Marketing World, I hope you'll take in my session on Monday, March 13th at 4 p.m. I promise to help you excel through the stories you tell. And of course, I hope you'll swing by and say hello if you're in the area. In the meantime, if you'd like to get cracking on becoming an ABT savant, take my ABTs of Agile Communications quick online course. In just 1 hour through 3 20-minute training modules, I'll walk you through the primary and secondary ABT build processes. I promise you, it will completely revolutionize how you communicate through the power of storytelling. Thanks for listening, and remember, as you grow as a more confident, compelling communicator through the power of storytelling, that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make sure that's epic. Thanks for celebrating with me today. Story on, my friend.
So that was an amazing presentation from Park Howell. Can't thank him enough. It's been so fun for the past decade working with him. And as he mentioned in there, some of the different things that we've come up with together and really dovetailed. And today, the ABT is at the core of all that he does in his business training. As a matter of fact, as I'm speaking right now, I think he's at a big conference in San Diego giving a big presentation. I think he said like 600 people on the ABT framework. There's just so much more to come with it. And what was very cool in that presentation was that he eventually came around to ending with the new version of the Narrative Gym book with Marlis Douglas and Keisha Barr that he had on his episode, and our newest and most skilled ambassadors for the ABT framework. So on that note, hope you all have a good time with everything in your lives, and we will see you again on the next episode of the ABT Time podcast. See ya.